Hey everyone, my name is Sherry and today I want to talk to you about my top 10 favorite books of 2016. This is not in order, so let's get started. The first book that I want to talk about is Between the World and Me by Tahenisi-Coates. I really enjoyed this book. I feel like it's a very important book to read. It's basically a series of essays that the author wrote as letters for his son, and he just talks about personal and historical events of what it's like to be a black person in America. So if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. I think it's important, and it really just gives you somebody's experience as well of what it's like to deal with race in America. The next book I want to talk about is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. I can't really remember a lot of characters that I've loved as dearly as the main character in this book. Charlie is just a character that really got to me. So Charlie is somebody who has always been kind and good to people. He likes to please people, and all he really wants in the world is to be smart, because if he was smart, his mom would love him, he'd have more friends, and he'd feel like he would belong. So when an opportunity comes up for Charlie to undergo a surgery to increase his intelligence, he goes for it. And then as Charlie starts to become more smart, he starts to see that things are not always as they seemed. For example, people treated him a certain way, not out of kindness, but because they were really making fun of him. And then he starts questioning things about life and science in general. And Charlie just made me feel a lot of emotions. I rooted for him, I wanted things to work out for him, and finishing this book had me crying. It was one of the most emotional, heartbreaking books I've read, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. The next book on my list is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. So I don't really read a lot of murder mysteries, but I see Agatha's books everywhere. There are a few people on Instagram that I follow that really love her, so it got me curious to read her work, and I'm so glad that I did. And Then There Were None is basically a story about 10 people being invited to this island for a getaway, and one by one they start getting killed, which is terrifying when you think about it, because they find themselves stuck on that island with no way to get out. I love this book. It creeped me out a lot. I was paranoid. I couldn't put it down because I had to know who the murderer was. And then when I did learn who it was, I was just like, whoa. It was a little messed up, but it was also kind of like, that's pretty clever. If you haven't tried murder mysteries before, or if you haven't read any Agatha Christie books before, I really recommend this one. Next book I want to talk about is The Lies of Locke, Lamora by Scott Lynch. I've heard a lot about Scott Lynch's work, but I've never really read it, and then an opportunity for a read-along came up, so I decided to jump in. I don't read a lot of dark fantasy, but I absolutely loved Lies of Locke, Lamora. It's set in this world that kind of makes you think of Venice, but it has like very curious creatures and set in like a hostile environment. As a warning, Scott Lynch isn't stingy at all with his language. There are some scenes that are quite brutal and violent, so if you think that that's not for you, by all means skip this book. But if you're okay with that and you think you can handle it, do read it, because this book has such lovable, amusing, intriguing characters that will keep you reading. And I absolutely loved the plot twist in this book, because it kept me guessing, and then when it happened I was like, oh my gosh, I need to know what happens next. I finished the book way ahead of schedule because I loved it so much. Speaking of dark books, I might as well get this out of the way, but the next book on my list is called The Child Thief by Brom. So The Child Thief really mixes fantasy, it's a retelling of Peter Pan, and it has horror elements as well. If you guys know me at all, like, I am such a wimp when it comes to that stuff. But surprisingly, I was so engaged in this story that I just kept reading. Some parts I probably read too fast, but like, if you look into this story, there is so much more to it. In terms of writing, I will say that writing is quite simple, so this could be good and bad depending on your taste, but if you're engaged in the story and you want to get creeped out a little bit, I actually recommend this as a Halloween book, and let me know what you guys think. I also reviewed it on another video because I was like, I don't know how to write about this book, so I'm just gonna do a video blog on it. So I'll provide that link if you're interested, and let's move on to the next one. The next book on my list is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Tolls. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, I'm so sorry if I'm not. But this book is going to be loved by fans of historical fiction. So it's about a count who is sentenced to house arrest in this grand hotel in Moscow. I don't know if that sounds interesting to you, but let me tell you, this book has one of the most beautiful writing I have ever read. I love reading it and just savoring the book. I mean, the book is quite long, but I also didn't want it to end because I was just like, I need more of this writing. And I came to love the characters, especially the count, and I was just like, wow. Lamora Tolls, the way he describes things, it makes you feel like you are there, and you are gonna be sad that it's in a book and that you're not the one being there yourself. So please read this book. It's so good. It was released last year. Speaking of beautiful writing, the next book on my list also qualifies for that, and it is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. So there's a lot of mixed reviews for this book. It's either you hate it or you love it, and it will really depend on what you like as a reader. The Night Circus is about two magicians who pride themselves in doing magic differently, and then they take on apprentices. And what they do is they basically pledge that, okay, my apprentice is going to battle your apprentice in this circus. They can do what they want within the circus, so they can create anything, they can do illusions, as long as people actually can't tell that it's magic. In terms of plot and how fast it moves along, there really isn't any of that. It's very simple plot-wise, but if you can overlook that and appreciate this world and what happens within it, I think you'll really like this. I absolutely fell in love with this world, and I want to like jump in and be like, please let me in that circus and let me stay forever. The next book on my list is The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey, and this was such a pleasant surprise. This book is best experienced when you don't know anything about it going in, but this book was just a page turner for me. I loved the characters. It kind of reminded me of Flowers for Algernon in terms of we get to experience the world with the main character, and I just love reading it from the perspective of a child. There's a lot of things that this book tries to deal with. There's action, there's mystery, there's suspense, and there's heartbreak as well, because there are things that happen here that honestly for me I was like, oh man, like I know that had to happen, but I really didn't want it to. So read this book. Don't let the horror or thriller labels scare you. I thought it was fine. So let me know if you read this, and if you've read it, what did you think about it? The next book I'm going to talk about is Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel. This book was a treat for me. If you love giant robots, if you loved Pacific Rim and, you know, the Gundam series growing up, I think you will really enjoy this one. So this book starts off with a little girl who falls into a hole, and the hole she falls into is actually in the shape of a giant metal hand. And then she grows up and becomes, you know, part of a team that conducts research on where, you know, this hand is from, what does it do, and they basically find more parts all over the world, and they try to build this thing. One of the things that I found really interesting about this book was the fact that it questions certain things. It's actually written in the form of interviews, so that might put some people off. I was kind of concerned that it would put me off, but I found myself so engaged with just a story that I didn't mind it. Also, if you have a chance, I also read this as an audiobook. It's one of the best I've heard because it has a full cast of characters. I am so excited for the second book, which is coming out in April, and I was able to be approved for an advanced reading copy from NetGalley that I'm hoping to read next month. The last book on my list is not really just one book, but three, because it's a trilogy. It is the Man Trilogy by my favorite epic fantasy author, Robin Hobb. If you love fantasy that is well written, that is interesting, that deals with complex characters and even more complex world building, Robin Hobb is your woman, because this lady is just so incredible. She continues to impress me with what she's able to do the more I read her stuff. And this series in particular is definitely one of my favorites by her. Basically, if you've read her books from the very beginning, starting with the Farseer trilogy, this is the second continuation, if you want to look at it that way, of that trilogy that deals with pretty much a lot of the same characters with new ones as well and what happens. But I don't recommend skipping the series that come in between this in the Farseer trilogy, just because it makes this so much better if you know some of the things that are mentioned. Please read it in order or out of order. I know some people who read it out of order and still were satisfied, but please read them all, because it just makes it much more fun when you're like, oh my gosh, this is like the character that I loved from the other series that's related but separate, and it's just so interesting when she puts it all together. And I don't know how she does it. I don't know how she comes up with this or how she plans this, but she is just amazing. Like, I cried a lot reading these books too, so expect that, because you do get attached to characters. I feel like they're my family, so I feel like every time I read her books I'm like, I'm visiting my family. So if that doesn't convince you, I don't know what will, but if you follow me on Instagram, I like post about her every week. So yes, consider this another reminder to read more Hob. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know if any of the books I mentioned were things that you liked and you enjoyed. I would love to know what your top 10 were, or what you think are in your top 10 for 2017, since we're already in February. But thank you so much again. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up or subscribe to my channel, and I'm hoping to do more of them this year. Thank you!